Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Disc Guidance segment with the 2MK team. This content is being rebroadcast from the Amara2_MK channel to the 2_MK channel used by the team, with full permission, of course. Today we are looking at Sagat, specifically our SagatBot, which has been through its iterations and is now approximately ready for release. So here's our guidance on how to play it. As with many of our bots, we will be looking at the differences between the bot and the CPU first, before going into the inputs and the point system as a general thing, but we will give a quick rundown of the inputs in about 10 to 15 minutes into this stream. Just so it's clear, the meters I am starting with here are maximum start on Sagat's V and CA gauges. Not as useful for the CPU tests, but still leaving it in place. And standard, normal for all things on the one player side. We will use CPU 7 for our main contrast, just to show off the difference between the bot and the CPU and why we need one versus the other. So, it would be relatively obvious that you don't need a lot of bot capacity to deal with Sagat as a whole, because Sagat has a relatively simple game plan, at least when he's playing from far away. Unfortunately, as with most characters, when you have a high enough level of the CPU, it is capable of reading your inputs and is therefore capable of causing some problems. Another issue that this particular bot has as a result of that, or rather that the CPU has, is that it starts certain actions at certain times and isn't really very unpredictable at all. On the upside, it becomes easy to make a bot that isn't too different from the CPU in the same way. However, we do see something a little strange here. Sagat seems to move forward more than necessary. And finishes some combos that you generally wouldn't expect the CPU at level 7 to finish. And functionally speaking, it would be better to have an inconsistent bot than a CPU who is too consistent and not so good. You will also notice that for the most part, even with full meter, the CPU has so far mostly not used a lot of metered moves. But But we can't just assume that this is the way it behaves against all characters. The CPU does have some changes in its actual AI, depending on who it's fighting. But you can see that so far, it's not specifically difficult to do. And if I try to stay at a range where I would expect it to be causing me problems with zoning, it seems to move around and close in a lot more, but without a specific plan. So, while it would absolutely be possible to use the Sagat CPU to get some idea of how he works, at least against him Bison here, he doesn't seem to have as much variation as you'd expect. And if we raise him to level 8, there's not a whole lot of change in that. In fact, if anything, he becomes a little more aggressive and not in the way that helps. Fortunately, he does at least throw a couple more fireballs. Still, he also doesn't respond to a lot of things that you would figure he'd respond to. So let's try a different character to see if that problem happens across more characters.
Dare you challenge the king?
Our hope in this case, therefore, is to create a SagatBot that is a little less predictable. Because if nothing else, we appear to be able to move around him in about the same timing every time. That seems a little better, but he misses his combos now. So we've sort of gone to the other side. I'm playing sort of wildly and just mostly jumping. But he spends too much time doing things that aren't related to zoning or attacking, meaning that he ends up getting clipped by jumps. Even if I'm at one of my further ranges, and would barely make it work, he's moving around and causing all sorts of problems for himself. It really isn't that he's being useless, nor that he isn't responding correctly, but all of the little pieces put together make it a little bit difficult to get proper training done. Moving closer doesn't seem to stop him from sticking out buttons and making himself vulnerable. And whatever else is happening really isn't helping him too much. So, The simple idea of, can I use this bot to understand how players are going to play? Can I use this CPU option to tell how the player is going to play? It seems that, at least in this case, we're not going to get too far this way. We're still not sure yet, but given the two characters in question seen so far, one of them is difficult to zone, but he tries it in the wrong way anyway. The other is relatively easier to zone out. But you're seeing yourself get away with a lot more things, and a lot more buttons that could be punished from Sagat's side that are mostly effective because you would figure they wouldn't actually even be hit. Well, he's got combos at least. But that in itself is also not so great for us. That's basically just one thing he's shown so far that would be really useful. That tendency to hit a lot of heavy tiger shots from close by. But most importantly, as has just been demonstrated, that move shown can end up being really important in the matchup, and he uses very little of it. So he's got combos, he's got dangerous positions. But we're not immediately feeling this is something I can use for training. Since like most CPU, he alternates mostly between being cheap and being easy to work around without actually having to understand the matchup. Part of the reason I'm being mashy, for example, is the fact that a lot of the time you can be at advantage and the computer will try to do certain moves anyway because it read some input. And for CPU opponents with slower moves, this can actually be a real problem for getting your training done. They will do nonsensical things based on what you were pressing a moment before, but because their move has a certain startup, you could get away with some stuff. Stuff like that. So overall, he's a good start. He's a good way to get used to what Sagat does. But because Sagat doesn't have a lot of pressure or similar things in the first place, he's not necessarily optimal. And we decided to move onward a little bit. But just to verify where we stand in terms of characters, we're going to give Ed a try.
Sagat, you challenge the king.
As movement style is meaningfully different than that of either Chun-Li or Bison, but it has a better way around Sagat zoning. So we immediately see, oh look, he does zone, but is that good? He's zoning against the character we need him to zone the least against, the one who could actually deal with most of it. So it would only take a little bit of time to work out where you need to stand and what you need to do to block Sagat's fireballs, but if you're trying to learn something from this particular experience, that's the only thing you can learn. Ed doesn't really need to get in on Sagat in the first place. And this, while it can be difficult, you simply would learn it by range eventually. So this hasn't been useful for our data collection at all. We either know that he'll be relatively easy to jump on, because he'll throw too many, read our inputs, and therefore that's why he's throwing them, or he's just effectively set up so that he'll just keep throwing them no matter what. Well, you notice that he actually does this based on whether or not he got the last one jumped over or avoided in some way. Because then he can't throw anymore, so he moves in. If you crouch under the high ones, for example, this sort of happens. And while it can be useful, there's definitely some Sagat tactics in there. Particularly that if he can make you do any standing move while he's approaching like that, you might get clipped. It doesn't necessarily teach you the things in question. You don't actually have things about this that are harder to understand. Just things that are either working or not working. Therefore, that's our explanation for why we've created a SagatBot in the first place. You may not find the two look too different, and that's actually good. All we require from ours is that it is a little more controlled or unpredictable depending on the character you're facing. Because mostly, this CPU doesn't line up very well the way it behaves to the character it's fighting. Or rather, it does so from the perspective of teaching you to deal with Sagat's basic abilities more so than the higher level potential game plan. Therefore, let's do our usual switch. We'll go to Ryu and we'll switch to a darker stage so that we can see some of the inputs we're talking about. As usual, we will start in the underground arena. And we're about 20 minutes into stream, so we're going to go into the break.
Underground arena.
And talk about specifics of inputs. This information will of course be on our website 2-mk.org when we are releasing the bot on Sunday. So, let's go through one at a time, as these are a little bit interactive and therefore there's a lot of space to cover in terms of what they do with each other. Now, each of Sagat's inputs has a very slight variation, in fact 3 variations, but right now we're showing off the ones that are both the strongest and the least predictable. So if you have a character who has a very specific game plan against Sagat, you may not be using these. This is also generally the hardest to input, but not all of them. Note that we are able to get both his Tiger Uppercut and his regular Tiger Attack and his throw from this one input. Again, the version you put into yours may not be the same, but the idea behind it is the same. He should have probably a throw. It could be a forward or a back dash in this particular one. And only in one of them will he actually have the Tiger Uppercut in this version. Hence our suggestion for it being the least predictable. But if you're facing against him and you don't generally expect to be jumping at him because that's just not how your character works, it may not be the optimal way to input it. This input is therefore basically a light punch, a dash in one or the other direction, quarter circle forward and end. In the case of this version, he is holding the throw input until just about the end. Usually the actual end of the input, holding it while it is ending the recording. But because of the very, very minor specifics of the timing, he therefore is using a negative edged low Grand Tiger shot. He has a specific, very difficult start to the input with down, down forward, light punch. This is not as hard as it seems, and it is not technically first frame, so it just needs to be done quickly and you get a little bit used to it. The important thing is to hit the down forward and light punch at the same time, because when it combines with any other quarter circle forward edge shifted motion, it will enable him to do the light Tiger Uppercut, which is his anti-air Tiger Uppercut. So let's move on to the next input. In basically every case, his action 2 is going to be jump related. In this particular case, we try to get a short uppercut style motion into the jump at the end to make him able to do more Tiger Uppercuts. Now he seems to be just jumping around right now, but we made sure to have both a forward and a back jump in there. He does the forward jump standard, but if we knock him out of the air a little bit with neutral jump or something. Let's try a neutral jump light kick. He has the potential to back jump in here somewhere, but because the back jump is so much less likely, you're going to expect to see this most of the time. But when it interacts with other actions, it's not likely to be so clear-cut. This input is difficult because you are holding his V skill the entire time. This is why it does not appear to have any actual input in it, but if we stop him and restart, usually with interval 1, you'll be able to see it just once. It's actually fairly important that you do this because this prevents him from doing the medium kick every time he jumps, if it's timed correctly. But it is possible to do this somewhat without that, so you don't have to stress yourself too much about it. This lessens the amount of time he spends blocking, of course. Our jump inputs are normally holding down back for the duration of them. But in this case, it can be useful to have that extra tiger uppercut option. For action 3, he can once again have either a forward or backward dash. Sometimes, therefore, this is the one that adds a throw in it, because the one with the forward dash always has the throw. But in this case, we're just using a forward triple punch to get his overhead at the beginning, like that. A dash. It's a little easier if it is the back dash. And the timing for this is tweaked a little bit to make sure that most of the time he will just keep on throwing the tiger shot. If you get far enough away from him, he actually has another option. But this isn't really necessary nor effective, because that will only happen if this has replayed into itself, which is not really your concern. However, it is useful if you happen to crouch near him and force him back to that side of the screen, because if you can force him back, usually when you've cornered him, there's the chance that the tiger will not leave the screen before he actually moves to do it again, resulting in him doing the overhead at close range instead. With the EX, he will be able to do both things, so you're not really sure either way. This is important because this timing also combines with the others well to recreate things. Therefore, this is a forward triple punch, does not need to be first frame. Usually a back dash. A quarter circle forward, edge shifted, and end. Therefore, even though this looks a little complicated, let's combine this with actions 2 and 1, even though it's relatively early to be doing that, just to look at one aspect of it to make it a little clearer. So we're going to turn on 1, 2, and 3, even though we haven't looked at 4 and 5 yet. And it won't take him too long to do what's required, I believe. That is the important thing. That timing in which he normally would do the back dash into another tiger shot, if he had a reason to, also opens up the chance for back dash into tiger uppercut. He also has the timing to simply do tiger shot into tiger uppercut. He will do this regardless of whether or not you get the final tiger uppercut into the jump part of the motion, i.e. we don't specifically need action 2 at all. But we want that mostly he uses the light tiger uppercut. He does have the capacity to do the heavy though, and therefore has the capacity to do the ES as well. He's not as likely to, given that he will tend to use it up long before that on ES Tiger Shot, but he can do it. The Tiger Knee is also available as a negative edge if you got the one into the jump. So, onward. We'll turn those back off and look at his action 4. His action 4 is relatively simple as well. Is a forward V trigger input, followed by down back V skill, and specifically timed once again with the quarter circle forward, so that he tends to use it this way. If you get it all right, the quarter circle forward at the end will link back into the same forward V trigger input, and the kick takes priority, resulting in a heavy grand tiger shot. And again, he's timed to just more or less repeat this one indefinitely. If you poke him though, he may have the option to use his Anki charge. And once he has the meter, he's able to use this instead. In the event that somehow it is not a quarter circle forward that precedes this, he will be able to do his forward heavy kick. But in combination with anything else, as you've seen before, with action 1 for example, it should be able to do the basic light tiger uppercut. A simple input overall. The difficulty in entering it has to do with making sure its timing is right, so that he keeps on throwing the tiger shot. But it's not too hard to do, and therefore you can just do it until it's right. So we finish it out with action 5. As usual, we have put action 5 as either the disposable input or the hardest and most important input. Since Sagat has no disposable inputs, we have this one, most important input. This input starts with a standing light medium kick. It's a complex input in a lot of ways, and it's difficult to both see and explain why everything it does is actually done, because the input that is required is being hidden constantly. So let's turn on the interval and look at it that way again. It starts with the single standing medium heavy. However, going right into the down V trigger, meaning that when he has no V meter available, he can do a sweep. And a light punch and light kick, primarily for something you'll see later on. Finishing off with a forward forward light kick, medium kick again, that is actually held. The important and confusing thing here, therefore, is that forward input drifts into a down forward that is put in while getting to down. Therefore, not all versions need to have this, and not all versions necessarily can. But the medium kick is released around that time. Or rather, the game is okay with it being released around that time. If your input is slow, it won't actually do this, but it's not really all that important to the bot. And if you don't want him to do this extra tiger knee, then you simply don't have it. Press straight down instead, and he won't do this. This input has no down to forward motion at the end for a specific reason. That same forward medium kick that we're seeing is one of the ways that Sagat uses his Kara cancel to extend the range of all of his moves. So let's look at it in conjunction with his action 3. It's not very visible, but because Sagat takes a certain amount of time to get through the animation of that forward medium kick, and because some other interactions are possible, he becomes able to Kara cancel moves out of it. If you're familiar with watching his motion, you can see that he's actually Kara cancelling a low tiger shot itself. This happens because he has gone from action 5 to action 3 and back again. If we give him full meter on the CA gauge, you'll be able to see this more clearly. When he does cancel that, it is using that semi-hidden quarter circle forward into light kick, medium kick. So generally, if he has meter, that Kara cancel will always be into EX, Grand Tiger Shot. But with the correct timing for this, and it's not too difficult, he'll do it for all his moves. In fact, there's nothing really to test about it, given that you generally just need to do things so quickly that it doesn't even matter. The amount of time it takes a person to input most things following on from that forward medium kick at the end of action 5 will usually Kara cancel. You don't have to delay anything, just make sure you have hit the forward medium kick, and if your dash inputs or similar are fast enough in the others, he will just have this ability. So that uses up our usual 20 minutes of exactly what the inputs are. Of course, you can find these on the website when the bot is released, and they will have all the variants there. The latter two don't have as many variants, of course, so it's not really relevant. Therefore, we're going to return Sagat to his maximum start. And shift to our general favorite stage. So that we can look more into the point system and game plans. The point system, of course, being what we will look at while the bot is running entirely as a whole. In order to get the most out of SagatBot, you have to think about him from the perspective of a player that is doing well against you already. If you treat him as some of our easier bots where you're just trying to do the one thing no matter what, he becomes a little bit more difficult to gain experience from. With our SagatBot, like a few of our other spacing related bots, part of the point system forces you to stand at the required range yourself. And that is the core point system. The core point system of our SagatBot is that you need to be able to land a jump in on him from really far away. And we're talking like only barely hitting with the tip of your longest jump in button far away. This is because if you're not pressuring a good Sagat player, that's probably approximately where you are. The problem with this is that you have telegraphed your approach very heavily. Especially if you were waiting to jump over one of his tiger shots and not just jumping and hoping you didn't land on one. You can see that the tendency will be that unless he just happens to throw another one, you're going to get clipped by either tiger knee or tiger uppercut in that spacing. But more importantly, if you actually needed to do this, you have the problem of whether or not your combo will actually land once you've landed the first hit. For some characters, you can be out of spacing for your regular combo and need to learn an entirely different one to deal with Sagat as a whole. As you can see there, it's possible to jump in from so far, especially when he's doing certain moves, that you just don't have a standard follow-up. Even Ryu's relatively long crouch medium punch can whiff. In fact, when you're learning it, we suggest strongly to make that part of the point system in itself, to try to jump from so far that your medium punch or similar things will whiff entirely. Because you have to get used to this. Sagat will extend a hurt box for a fairly long time after throwing out a tiger shot. And you can make contact with this hurt box if you have good timing, but you may not be able to convert much off of it without EX either. And therefore if you need the knockdown, you have to know what to go for and whether or not you'll make it in the first place. Similarly, you wouldn't want to necessarily go for that every time, especially if you didn't need to. If you happened to be close enough to land something else, even if it's just sweet, you want to go for that. Sometimes Sagat moves himself a little forward and you need to be able to identify in midair which of those things has happened. If you do not, you may find yourself being whiff punished by Sagat's stuff. But as you can see, this leaves you super vulnerable to getting hit by a ton of Sagat's forward moving moves. And with such easy single hit style attacks, when he's in this V-trigger, he's much more likely to hit you while armored. We have not shown him off in V-trigger 1 that much, but he is effectively just about the same, he just does more zoning instead. We'll change to that in a bit when we're talking about a different point system. So with slightly random movement, but the capacity to do his Tiger Knee and similar, whereas the CPU does not do this, you're set up to face his spacing a little better. And that, just demonstrated, is the other reason for building the bot the way it is, even though it is not specifically involved in the point system. A good Sagat player, or even just a beginner Sagat player who's watched the demonstrations and understood what they were trying to say, will be trying to hit you with their Tiger Knees from max range, possibly. This is because a max range Tiger Knee, if you hit it from just the right spacing, is a relatively safe move. You must punish it with something very light, even though in a lot of situations, if you look at just the frame data, I'm not sure even how they'll represent that. Overall, understand that if Sagat is hitting you with Tiger Knee from very close like that, he's easily throwable. You can hit 5 frame moves at least. You have some good options. If Sagat does Tiger Knee in those spacings, not only might he be close to advantage, in some cases he's spaced such that he's at actual advantage. He can pull back his hurt box using Tiger Shot, he can use Tiger Uppercut, he can sometimes even trade with Light Punch. Having you stand at that range raises the chance that Sagat will be doing this when you're trying to move in toward him. Reacting to a Tiger Knee whiff is similarly difficult, especially if you're not familiar enough with the ranges to know in advance that he was going to whiff. So you're constantly stuck in this very quick decision of, should I go for a hit? Should I go for a throw? Should I try for a combo? Or do I let him get away with this? Our goal therefore in this particular aspect was to help you learn that through the bot, as we expect is a thing you're going to be facing a lot if you play a sufficiently good Sagat player, or just someone who understands that aspect of the matchup, even if they're not necessarily good at the rest of it. But this is not part of the point system because there's no specific way to quantify it. You're just supposed to do your best to note it while trying to get the jump-ins and being at other spacings. Many characters can fortunately just hit Light Punch, but because the Light Punch is a punish and is therefore not always going to be counter hit confirmable, and because it also tends to push back his hurt box because of how he was animated at the point of impact, if he lands a particularly well-spaced Tiger Knee, you could maybe punish with Light. But if your opponent has a good sense to not press any buttons, you probably didn't get anything out of that. That said, that is not one of our point systems, so let's move on to the next one, and in doing so, we're going to change Sagat over to V-Trigger 1. Which thanks to their new system is an easy prospect. The second point system is also jumping. Specifically, when you are close to Sagat and know you want to jump, usually over Grand Tiger Shot, or if he's just not expecting it. A lot of his hurt boxes lead to him being relatively easily crossed up or jumped over without him being able to immediately respond with too much. His better moves for taking down cross-ups from the ground are relatively slow, and give you a good chance of getting him. His best option usually is jump back medium punch or similar. And I'm sure you'll meet players with this ability. But it's still enough, especially since Sagat tends to move his hurt bots around while you're trying to go for it. Therefore, you need to be able to readjust in midair to see whether or not Sagat has done so, and potentially not go for your combo or something else based on this. So if you wanted that form, we needed something to make sure you couldn't easily jump over him without thinking about it. This is a little harder to get in V-Trigger 1, because in V-Trigger 2, you're more likely to get it by accident when he moves, whereas in V-Trigger 1, you're more likely to get hit by Tiger Cannon while trying to move forward into position, or just overall. You can see though, there are a lot of situations where you jump with a button that could toss up. Sagat doesn't look as if he's going to get hit, but he does, or he moves into position to get hit while you're in the air. And this may make difference to your combos if you want to optimize your damage. But most importantly, mentally correcting yourself when it looks like he is going to drift completely, when you are going to drift completely jumping on him, can be really helpful. As you can see, he keeps up his zoning the entire time. And once you have these things on your mind, it's actually a lot harder to keep all of Sagat's zoning in mind and spend the amount of time we normally would be able to do just doing basic things because the bot is quote-unquote predictable. In short, the bot's predictability to your mind drastically decreases using this point system, while at the same time training you in how to deal with a Sagat whose spacing is good enough that jumping has to be one of your options in the match. Fortunately, if you learn this jump, it's often true that the Sagat player can't just uppercut, because they don't know whether or not you're going to cross them up either. Tiger Uppercut tends to move Sagat relatively far forward. Even light Tiger Uppercut can whiff entirely. We know for sure that medium and heavy can, because we tested the bot with those as well. The light one is much less likely to whiff, but given the timing that the opponent wants to use it in, probably, you can get away with a lot more. Our next part of the point system. We've got two hidden inputs of Sagat's Angry Charge. They're hidden really cleanly, so you don't have to worry about leniency too much. He should, therefore, use them in the correct part of his rhythm. Usually when he's been interrupted in a way that leads to him not having anything to do for a moment, or you have let a tiger shot pass over your head, or given him too much space on a knockdown. As you can see, generally he doesn't just use his Angry Charge in neutral too much. But a player could do this, and they have a fair number of reasons why it would be a good idea even to just sometimes use this move after a tiger shot like that. Especially a low one. Because if they've convinced you not to jump and managed to put you at a space where you can't easily dash up and punish them, then they could get away with it. He does not actually animate for as long as you think he does. Therefore, that is the requirement. React in time to punish that, usually with a throw. It doesn't have to be a throw, and certain characters have a much easier time doing this than others because they can reach with a special. But therefore we suggest, unless you plan to risk doing such a special, if your character happens to have a long reach with their special but the special be unsafe, or likely to whiff and therefore be whiff punished, you're actually better off dashing up if your dash is decently fast, for multiple reasons. You get to find out what the Sagat player's response is in that spacing. You've gotten closer to a character whose intention is to keep you out to begin with. And if they are twitchy enough, you might be just out of range and able to bait either a throw attempt, which then whips, or you could jump over, or bait a tiger uppercut, which you can then punish quite heavily. And at the lower levels, we're generally expecting that the sort of player who tries to get time for the angry charge is also the type that will uppercut or something directly out of it if they realize you've gotten too close. Similarly, this is actually one of the easier things to get on certain types of punishes or knockdowns, if you're mentally prepared enough. If you're overzealous though, you'll end up running into Sagat's buttons and fireballs. On the other side, it is a straight reward for actually managing to get a knockdown. But of course, if you choose to try to get all your points by knocking the bot down and hoping it does the scar that you can punish it, at that point it is somewhat your loss, though we will do our best to make sure that you understand this and therefore don't spend too much time trying to do it. Overall though, if you're trying to get the points in the normal way, you're not going to have a lot of chances to use this. And as standing right next to him doesn't necessarily help, and depending on which he has, you will see him backdash sometimes, you may have a little more trouble taking advantage of this than you think. It's for this reason that we specifically require that this is done with a throw, for two reasons. First of all, it lets us normalize which characters can do it. Other than their dash speed, we should expect that it's almost always the same, and you should be measuring your capacity to punish certain things based on your own character's dash speed and dash range anyway. The second reason is obviously to give SagatBot more options to get out of the same situation. Meaning that he has Tiger Uppercut, back and forward jump, and backdash as his options out of this. Making it more obvious to you when you weren't fast enough to actually punish what he was doing, i.e. the Scar charge itself. He is also, of course, intended to slowly space himself such that by throwing enough Tiger Shot, Tiger Knee becomes a safe and good idea. This is less likely in V-Trigger 1, so let's change back to V-Trigger 2 for the final part of the explanation. The final thing you're intended to do behaves a little differently depending on which version of the bot you have, and therefore is the least important. In fact, we even take it out as a point system earlier on just to give you more ideas of what to focus on properly. Therefore, if you're going into the harder versions of the bot, you will not get points for this. The point in question is to simply tech Sagat's throw, but as you've seen, Sagat doesn't really throw that often. Depending on how exactly you input the uppercut, the action 1 uppercut, and the timings that he has for them, his throw should be limited to generally right after whiffing a tiger, which is less likely. If you are moving back to get the points for that though, he should still be able to do it. And there are of course other timings where he will hit you with standing, i.e. normal tiger shot, B plus, because that move is +1, and have the capacity to throw right after. But it's not a high chance of that either. Therefore, this is something that Sagat is meant to do very few times out of his options. And as a result, you'll be more inclined to get you with it. It requires a very specific combination of things to happen for Sagat to hit you with this throw. In fact, let's just block for a little bit and see how long this takes, because it usually takes a very long time. He's generally happy to throw fireballs from far away instead. If you watch the inputs on the right carefully, oh there it is, you'll note that he often does hit the throw input, but he's usually in the middle of something else. It is therefore timed such that if he lands certain forms of Tiger Knee from certain ranges, in this case let's jump over his head and try to block from there in fact, it's helpful if he's not pushing us into the corner directly, because then he's too close. And then we're relying on him to back himself off. Generally, when one goes into that input, Sagat should already have been doing things such that he's doing Tiger Uppercut instead. It is the rarity of this throw and the condition under which he uses it that make it important and interesting to us. Because it is one of Sagat's stronger responses to whiffing a Tiger Knee barely in front of you. But if you look at the same times in which he hits buttons as a generality, you'll note that even though he's hitting things that normally lead into moves at particular times, he doesn't actually end up doing any moves there, he just does something simple. This is the same timing that he would generally be using that throw. So in all this time, we've only actually seen him use it once. If you are playing the bot at full, he will tend to be a little more prolific with it. But it is not really a focus on that so much as to make you think about it so that you can then measure where would he actually do this if he were a player, where could he do this as a bot, and what should I be worried about or trying to figure out. So, let's look at some other characters and their approaches to this bot. Things that slip past the radar a little bit. We will return to where we started and look at M. Bison. And given my style of M. Bison, we will be using his V-Trigger 1. So as demonstrated at the beginning of the stream, I was mostly able to deal with this by using double reverse. But now we have a Sagat that is more mobile, even if it's just for randomness sake, he's more mobile. So he's not specifically harder to hit with the Devil Reverse at all. But now that he has a controlled, specific way he's meant to be fought, we also have the other pieces of it. And we know that if we use the CPU, but stick to mostly the same goals as mentioned before, it's not necessarily going to turn out the same. Let's look at it from, I'm trying to jump in from very far away. But he's never going to give me this option because he keeps on moving. And he's not moving in a useful way for this. He's either letting me get away with things, or advancing on me himself, which, while it is entirely possible to play Sagat that way, is not something we expect to see too much of. Similarly, since he will almost always read the jump, and therefore almost always block perfectly, it would be up to my timing to make sure I always got it. It's hard to say whether or not one could learn more by trying to do it against this, or if you learn less because of the change in opportunity. But we do know that he's basically able to either try to zone you or not. And somehow this ends up being relatively predictable. His reactions are a little bit too perfect, basically. This can be good in a lot of ways, and again, we're not saying don't train with the CPU at all. But the bot is definitely there to help you understand what you were required to do in the matchup to begin with, so that if you do decide to fight the CPU, you have a decent idea of what's going on. Bison players in particular should note that you really don't have a problem reaching with this medium punch thing compared to most characters, so you shouldn't necessarily assume that you have to worry about making sure you're too far out for anything. Bison will usually find a way to combo. So there are a few characters for whom the CPU is basically just as useful. But it doesn't teach you much about things like Tiger Knee, spacing, or other options Sagat has. It's mostly can you jump or not. And the main problem with this is you're not under sufficient stress trying to do other things or watch for other things. That's the general opinion. So we add the bot who has more options to take you off guard, even though he will not be strictly as strong in the zoning department. And as all our bots are intended to help you at the bronze and lower silver tiers, you're also looking for the situation where the opponent is being a little bit crazy, a little bit daring, or just trying to win off your guts. Some execution mistakes maybe, some slightly off tactics, anything that makes it a little different from how you should naturally play. The other aspect to it is a certain emotional component. Clearly it's a bot. Clearly it's just doing a specific random sequence. But with the timings created, the bot can and will sometimes just set you up entirely and randomly, but with a decent chance, uppercut your jump-ins. When is the CPU doing this or dashing out of your stuff? You can get used to the pattern, you can learn to make it happen. You can go into all sorts of theory about how it should be done. When it's the bot that just happens to randomly uppercut you at the right time, it's a little easier to simulate the feeling of facing a player in those situations. The final requirement here is actually that you can't just jump in on Sagat as soon as he gets up. The requirement is that you give Sagat time to take one action. You may not need to remember this, but you'll find obviously that the bot is way too easy if you don't. Because then it just becomes knock him down, hope he doesn't quick rise, and jump. But again, this will teach you nothing, so we have specifically pointed out, if you want the point, you must let Sagat take one action after a knockdown, if you happen to knock him down. and you decided I'm moving back to my optimal position. Obviously, in a rail match, you would not move all the way back there, and your optimal position would be something else. But if he does manage to get you off him, he'll try to put you back there quickly. And depending on your positioning, you may not want to chase Sagat down. He does, however, have both quick rise and back roll to help deal with this. So one action, and it's okay to take the point even if it's like jumping in on a tiger uppercut, because in fact that may be important. You may in fact need to jump in on a person like that, who just whiffs tiger uppercut because they were, let's say, walking forward very slightly and then try to throw a tiger shot. Being able to confirm that into damage is equally important. However, of course, don't let our bot make you have bad habits. Don't just give Sagat space on every knockdown. You can also use him somewhat when you are playing a character whose longer or better or unconventional knockdowns don't lead to good pressure. For example, that has good knockdown pressure stuff related to it. And therefore I should sometimes just use it. But let's look at someone else. Chun-Li similarly has generally similar knockdown pressure. If you're ready for it, you're most likely going to get it. But we do have an option for a character who doesn't have quite the same input on things. Though given certain people's fighting styles, you would be surprised that he does not actually have good knockdown pressure. And we're going to use V-Trigger 2 for this. The key to what one considers good knockdown pressure is specifically having the ability to make your opponent guess between roll and something else. Guile has some good stuff, but depending on his spacing, he doesn't usually have that. It basically comes down to how close were you when you got flash kicked. As you can see here, if you have a standard knockdown, but if you are too far out, Guile can't reach you in time. So he might want to let you stay there. at which point then you have to go back to getting points the regular way. Fortunately, Sagat is relatively easy to zone. If he isn't throwing Tiger Shot of his own, of course. That said, there's always that sort of thing. But we're not here to show off Sagat's general zoning or lack thereof. The point is more so toward this situation. Gal's effectiveness on dealing with Sagat at Sagat's optimal range, even with flash kick, isn't necessarily so great for him. That huge distance of knockback means that a quick rise generally means you have no good reason to go in. And when facing a character who has the ability to pull back hurt boxes, do invincible moves, and pick themselves up from that far away, you don't want to take any chances on wake up, especially if you were already winning the zoning game somehow. No, that was a reversal. So it's not as if he can't do anything. And that moment is the moment you're generally hoping that your bot is capable of. To have that little zoning war with you, and as soon as you decide to jump, uppercut you anyway. Our goal is to make this as much like the feeling of playing a player as possible, though not necessarily the technical level of it. So if you feel as if that's what's happening, we've done said job. Therefore, even though it's not necessarily that helpful in this case because of the many variants thereof, we're going to go over the inputs briefly one more time at the end of stream, as we often do, and then bid you a good weekend, and you can await bot release at 7 or so on Sunday Eastern time. Usually it's 6, but there's leeway. This is the unpredictable version of SagatBot. There are other versions for if your main is Rushdown, and if your main is Zoner themselves, particularly Fang and similar. Or grapplers who have trouble getting in certain situations. This input is down, down, forward, light punch, forward dash. We put in like one back press just to set the timing right and to prevent it from turning into a tiger uppercut at the wrong timing. So down, down, forward, light punch, back, forward dash, quarter circle forward. Note that there's a throw after the dash. You do not have to have that throw there if you do not find it useful, but there it is. Mostly you can drop it if you find it difficult to input in time. The throw does not need to be visible in any way, so buffers, let it do its thing. Input 2 is, in this one's case, a forward jump going through, up, back. Usually to back. You don't need to go all the way around, but if you're fast, it's a little easier to do that. I suggest mostly just trying to get to back. From there, go straight to forward, and then do the forward, down, down, forward, the Shoryuken uppercut style motion. You must hold the V skill button the entire time for this. This isn't necessarily too difficult, but the main difficulty is in putting it in first frame to begin with. We will have suggestions as to how to do this, especially in this version. Since it is a very specific and unique input, you do not generally need to worry about trying to end it at a particular time. As long as he is at a generally useful height, it will work. He's not really meant to jump that much. It's supposed to be there just to throw you off enough to remember, oh wait, it can jump. Action 3 is a forward triple punch, does not need to be first frame, does not hurt if it is. A hidden back dash input in there, a certain amount of delay, which is difficult to explain, but can easily be tested. Then a quarter circle forward and end instantly to get the edge shift as usual. All you care about is that he can throw Tiger Shot, and that generally he will just do that over and over. You want specifically that he shouldn't actually do the back dash unless you poke him. I might as well let me heal all so that we switch on to the next. Action 4 is forward V trigger, down back V skill. Again, there's usually a delay, you're gonna have to find it. Quarter circle forward, and you're doing more or less the same as action 3. You don't want him to ever stop doing this unless you hit him, poke him, bother him in some way. It's much easier to time the use of the scar relative to these things. And finally, our complex action 5. Standing, light kick, medium kick. You can set this to one button now. We suggest the shoulder button because you must hold it at the end. Not for long, but you do need to hold it. Down B trigger. Light punch, light kick. There's a specific timing for these, but if you fought him enough, you'll see it. You basically want that generally if he hits one, you would actually see him with the other as well. You're not doing it so fast as to hide one within the other. Followed by the forward medium kick, light kick. and the tiger knee motion, which can also become a tiger uppercut. And while holding those kicks, and it will simplify a lot of his inputs. For example, this one. Depending on whether or not you have put in certain things for his frame or not, he will use more tiger knee or ES tiger uppercut. You can tweak it to your preference. This will also be mentioned in the page itself, but it's relatively intuitive if you've understood enough about edge shifting as a whole, and you've been using our bots long enough to do that. If not, just try to read it carefully and understand everything you can, and a couple of tries should make it clear enough. That brings us to the end of the disc guidance part of our stream. We may be hosting Traveling Controller, Balanced Patch, New England FGC action after this. I'm not sure what game they're playing this week. Join us next week, Monday, for more Mishmashing Battle Lounge. We'll be taking more of a look at G and putting a little more work into our research for SagatBot as the week progresses. Despite that though, we will be having Guilty Gear Tuesday train on Tuesday, of course, and Wednesday probably some Sandbag Casuals with the preliminary version of SagatBot to look at. On Thursday we should be having our Kame House lobbies, particularly if we have gotten the okay from Arxis, in specifically the sense that the servers would not be totally full of all lobbies. And if not, you can look forward to the continuation and refinement of our Dragon Ball FighterZ bot. We'll call it one bot because it really only takes one set of inputs. Bringing us back around to Friday, probably this guidance again, unless of course SagatBot turns out to be so complicated that we need 2 weeks. But you never know with the president. Therefore, good luck with your training, and good night everyone.